My friend Brain Monster, turning this audio into a small video just with a picture of my medic on the background. The one I'm going to talk about today is Ubers. It's a small little piece on Ubers. Basically it's my opinions around Ubers. It's neither right nor wrong, but this is the policies that I use when playing medic. Going to quickly run through a couple of things like counting Ubers, Uber advantages, Uber disadvantages, defensive Ubers, aggressive Ubers, what to do during an Uber, and obviously crits versus Uber. So to start off with, to make it quite simple, I'm going to quickly run through how I count Ubers. I try not to overcomplicate things, and for new medics out there, medics in the lower divisions, just trying to find a basic way to count your Ubers to begin with, rather than overcomplicating it like it can be. There is a forum post on ETF2L about medics counting Ubers. There's some feedback in there from some good medics in the game like Skeege and Admiral. How I count Ubers is to try to keep it as simple as possible. The easiest Uber to count is when you've got an Uber advantage. So an Uber advantage is obviously their medic has died and you've stayed alive, you're still healing. So as soon as that medic spawns on the scoreboard, pretty much the percentage you've got is your Uber advantage. Try to turn your Ubers into a second advantage rather than percentages. It's a little bit easier for a team to, the team to understand when you're using seconds rather than percentage, because 10 seconds is a lot more simple than 25%. 10 seconds gives a seconds on the clock that you've got to make things happen. So obviously 25% is a 10-second advantage. An Uber will take 40 seconds to fully charge if you're buffing a player who is building you. Obviously your pocket soldier should be building. It can sometimes take a little bit more than 40 seconds. 40 seconds is a perfect build, so that's what we're going to go off. So when you know that you've got an Uber advantage, you know that you've got 10 seconds. For me, the advantage you're looking for is anything from 5 to 10 seconds is a good advantage. Anything below 5 seconds can be a little bit risky and a little bit tight, because you have to use those under those 5 seconds to get in onto them and get the medic killed. But if it's a 10-second advantage, it's a good advantage. Pretty much the whole Uber, when you go in, is the Uber advantage, so you've got time to go in there, take the medic out. The advantages to counting Ubers is you know roughly how close their medic is to the Uber when you go in, rather than finding a surprise of the medic coming back onto you. There's a lot of people that will say out there that it becomes like a gut instinct. Some of my Ubers are a little bit of gut instinct. I'm not always tracking the medics, so sometimes they can be a little bit off, and sometimes my team will find that I say, oh, didn't realise he had Uber. That could be a little bit disappointing obviously for the team, because they need to understand when I have my Uber and when they have their Uber. So to count Ubers, make it pretty simple to count an Uber advantage is when their medic spawns, pretty much what you've got is your advantage. So to try and count an Uber disadvantage is a little bit more tricky, because you need to roughly know if you die when the medic Ubers onto you, pretty much your spawn time is your Uber disadvantage. But if you were to die when the medic is building, it's kind of a little bit more difficult. If you died with 50% and you were both running an even Uber and then you had a 15-second spawn, pretty much by the time you spawn and get back to your team, they've got a full Uber advantage. So it is a little bit tricky to count Uber disadvantages and Uber advantages, purely because you've got to try and be aware of what the medic's on, aware of your spawn time, aware of when you get back to a player to start healing. It becomes a little bit more difficult. So when I know that I'm running an Uber disadvantage, what I'll do is I'll hold my team in a defensive place. For wherever we're defending on the map, I'll hold them quite defensive, so I know that they've got an Uber to come in on. And then until I get up to the 90% mark, I won't move forward into an aggressive hold. I'll stay in that defensive hold because I'm not sure when that Uber's coming in, although I'm sure the medic's got the Uber. So basic things for lower medics out there for the time being to try and get used to is try to make advantage of your Uber advantages rather than the Uber disadvantages. If you've spawned and their medic hasn't died, just play the game as you don't have an Uber and they have an Uber. Hold your team with the sole goal of making them Uber through a choke point and having your medic in a fallback place. So in my map tips, I should obviously be going through the places where to stand if they've got an Uber and you haven't got an Uber. There's various places you can stand where the medic can survive. So for an Uber advantage, if it's 10 seconds, you need to obviously set your team up, and I'll come onto that slightly a little bit later in the aggressive Ubers. So that's pretty much counting Ubers. Try not to overcomplicate it. You know, there's other ways to count Ubers, there's scripts to count Ubers, but then it becomes more information to count the Ubers. And for now, just have a basic way of counting Ubers. When you're comfortable with that, move on to the next step of trying to be more precise around Uber disadvantages, Uber advantages. So just keep it nice and simple for the time being. Try and be very aware of what the advantages are. So when you have an Uber advantage and how you use that Uber against them, so if you run an Uber advantage, you would be quite aggressive onto their team. You would obviously want to make sure that you kill the medic, but it depends what sort of advantage you're running. If you had a 20-second advantage, there's not much danger of the medic getting an Uber before you've either capped the point and pushed them back, or done what you want to achieve. If he's very close to Uber, so say you're going in and you only have 8 seconds advantage left, you need to go straight onto that medic, and the medic needs to be a focus, and the medic needs to die pretty soon in that Uber push. But on a 20-second advantage, he's not really the concern. You want to take out the more major classes like a demo, your soldiers. If they're running the heavy for defending last, you want to take out those classes first because you're limiting what the medic can heal. Yes, he might get an Uber, but if you've not killed everyone sort of within the 20 seconds, he's probably only going to have one person left. So be very aware of that. You want to focus more on the team if you're running, say, a 20-second advantage than the medic. But if it's a 10-second advantage or less, you probably want to take the medic down as quick as possible to obviously utilize the rest of the Uber that you've got left. When I always think about playing medic and thinking about Ubers, I always think there's two types of Ubers out there. I think there's obviously the defensive Uber and there's the aggressive Uber. A defensive Uber is what it is. It's an Uber you're using to defend with. There's nothing really to say when you're going to pop it. You're basically going to use that Uber when your team's dying, you're trying to hold on to a point, or when you've been forced. So there's no need to plan for that defensive Uber. It's there to defend against the team. It's there to save players, and that's all a defensive Uber's for. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to use that Uber to get your team back, hold on to a point, keep people alive. There's nothing else for it. When you start to think about an aggressive Uber, it's an Uber that you use to push with, and a lot of teams in the lower divisions kind of suffer with what they want to use that Uber for and the sole aim of the Uber. When I try to mentor medics, I try to say to them that when they're going to use an Uber, set your Uber up around 75-80%, set up what you want your team to do. So whatever that Uber's for, if you've got an Uber advantage, it might be to push in, take the medic down, take the demo man down, whatever you need to do, but set it up around 75-80% so your team know what you're going to do, and at 95% you all need to be in that position to move on it. When you're using aggressive Uber, try to make it clear who the Uber's for. So it might be for your demo man soldier, it might be for your 2 soldiers, or it might be for the 2 scouts. This will obviously take away from the rest of your team trying to come over to your Uber, and it will make sure that you only focus on the players that you're trying to go in with. So then you know that 2 scouts are your Uber focus. If you're falling back out of a different entrance and you pick up a soldier, that's fine, but it encourages just your scouts to have that Uber, because then your soldiers know that that Uber's not for them. Same goes for your demo man and your soldier. Your roam soldier would know the Uber's not for them. He wouldn't drift into the Uber, and you would get more time on your demo man soldier to take down the key picks. So at 75-80%, you're going to start to think, what do I want from this Uber? If the other team are running an Uber as well, it might be as very simple as, I want to go in, make them pop and fall back. And you need to make it very clear to your team that when you're going to go in, make them pop. As soon as they've popped their Uber, you've done what you've hoped to achieve. And that's when you need to fall back, come out, fall back, and you'll find that teams will start to come onto you and perhaps overextend when you bring them back into another part of your team, and you can probably pick up a frag. What's the worst thing to do as a team is when you've popped Uber to try and stay in and trying to kill the person without Uber that the medic switches to, because you're actually staying into a very grouped area where you can get picked off yourself. So have a very clear goal in mind. The Uber is to make them pop, fall back, see where it leaves us. Has it left us with a pick? Has it left us with an advantage? Has it left us with a good position to push on? And at least then your team are not all going to wipe out and not all going to die, even though you've Ubered into them. So you want to be very clear. We're going to make them Uber with the demo man and soldier. As soon as they Ubered, we're going to fall back, come out, back out this side. This is where we're going to hold. We're going to see where it leaves us. If you were to pick the demo man, pick the medic, pick 2 scouts, you might want to decide, right, yes, this is time to push. There's no Ubers to think about anymore. It's just a simple, straightforward DM, push in, get some kills, get the cap, and that's it. That's the best way to start to think about using Ubers, is sort of have a plan of what you want to do with them rather than just Uber in and hope for the best. And then the same goes for an Uber against a non-Uber. Having a good understanding of what Uber advantage you've got. You might know that you've got kind of a 5-second advantage and you know where they're standing, so you might say, right, straight onto the medic, kill the medic, and then we'll go from there. That's the goal of that Uber. Or it might be that you've got quite a large advantage, so 20 seconds. And you might say, right, I want to go in, take out the demo man and the soldier, ignore the medic, we're going to wipe out as many players as possible, and then we're going to get the cap. Okay? another use for the Uber is in some points of some maps it's very hard to get onto people and kill them, so it can become a push Uber. So all you want to do is Uber onto them and push them out of the point. So I'm kind of thinking about Badlands Spire, going down the trash area, getting 2 scouts onto the point and just pushing a team back out through the trash door. No need to chase them down. There's no need to do anything like that. You just want to get the cap, and that's what you've achieved. So always try and make it clear what you want to achieve from your Uber, whether you want to achieve a cap, whether you want to achieve them Ubering, whether you want to achieve the medic kill, the demo kill. If your team are aware of what the Uber's meant to achieve for, you'll probably find that your Ubers start to work out a little bit better. And then you can become more intricate with the Ubers. So it can be, I'm going to Uber 2 scouts in, you're going to kill the medic, then you're going to drop down to the point, and on my call I'm going to bring the demo man in, flip over to you, last bit of Uber, spam point, cap point, job done. It becomes a little bit more intricate, but you can start to build that up over time when you've really done the basics of what you want to do with Ubers. That pretty much covers the aggressive Ubers. I mean, my biggest tip for medics out there at the lowest division is try to make it very clear what you want from the Uber. When you've achieved that from the Uber, start to fall back, see where it leaves you. There's no need to do anything else. You might get a major pick when you fall back, then you can assess it and decide whether you want to go in. It's pointless to stay in on an unsuccessful Uber. You might as well fall back. And if you try to push your team back, even if they haven't gone Uber, and you push everyone through one door, the demo man spamming, the Uber runs out, they could wipe your team out. So be very careful to understand when an Uber's not worked. This just brings me on to what to do during an Uber. During an Uber, it can become very hectic on comms because everyone's trying to put their point across. But at 30% as a medic, you need to be very clear at 30% whether that Uber's worked or failed. And at 30%, if it doesn't look good, just pull your team back and start again. At 30%, everyone can tell at 30% whether it's worth staying in or falling out. If it's worth staying in, then shout, stay in, let's go for this, let's try for this. But at 30%, if it's not, pull your team back. You've got a few seconds to get out, hopefully keep your team alive and keep numbers up, so not lose the point that's behind you and have a position in which to push back on the point in front of you and perhaps turn that. So for medics, let medics have control during an Uber. Your demo man needs to call out damage and things like that, but at 30% medics need to decide whether it's good or bad. And if it's bad, just fall back, rebuild, start again. There's no harm in starting again. There's no point in pushing an Uber that's unsuccessful. You're going to start to lose your team, you're going to start to lose position, and you'll start to lose the round. The last bit I'm going to cover on Ubers this time is crits versus Uber. So when to roll out crits. The thing with crits is it's an impact Uber. If you're going to run it for a whole map, it becomes very expected. But if you're going to roll it as an impact, then you need to use that as an impact. Try and hide the fact you've got crits and try to draw them into just one area where you can crits onto them and obviously get as many picks as possible. So what you need to do with crits versus Uber, there's other times you can use crits as well. When you're running a huge Uber disadvantage, perhaps it's not looking good, they're pushing last, there's no chance of you getting Uber, there's nothing to stop you going crits to hopefully maybe get that crits before you die and getting a few crit shots off at them. But if you are going to use crits, use it as an impact. Use it for a couple of lives, and soon it stops working, change back to your normal Uber. They might run crits as well, but just make sure with crits, when you use them on a specific class, so you might use them on your demo, and have another class just covering behind your medic, because your medic needs to be covered. There's obviously a lot of dangers with people jumping on your medic, so you might want to have a soldier and a scout just tucked behind your medic, trying to protect him when you use the crits. Obviously Demo Man is very handy to use the crits for, because crit stick is very lethal, but you need to spot as well for your demo man before he goes in. So you need to understand where the medic is. Make it as easy as possible for your demo man to get that first crit sticky onto that medic as soon as possible. Because with a crit Uber, you want to take that medic down. There's nothing else for it. It needs to be a med pick and then everything else that can come after that. Because if they're running an Uber, obviously you're going to get an Uber advantage. There's no set rules for when you can use crits, when it's perfect right time for crits. It's kind of your choice as a medic. Run crits if it's a little bit stale, run crits for something different, run crits possibly to force your team to be a little bit more aggressive. But the good thing about PCWs is run crits as practice. Don't go 5 nights in a row without using the crits. You need to keep very sharp with crits so your team are aware what to do with crits. You might find pushes that work quite well with crits, so do have a play around with them. that pretty much finishes my little recording on Ubers today. There may be another one coming up if I think of any other more specific Ubers around maps. As always, I've been Fish. You can find me in IRC and #tf2.mentor. You can find me in my Steam group linked on the ETF2L forum post as well. Once again, thanks to Brain and thanks